Welcome to Cybersecurity Marketing Unplugged, an interview series where we attempt to educate, inform, and subtly entertain B2B cybersecurity marketing professionals.
Well, welcome everyone to our latest episode of Cybersecurity Marketing Unplugged, where we attempt to educate, inform, and subtly entertain B2B marketing professionals who are focused on cybersecurity and information risk management. During this episode, we will cover something that has been very near and dear to us at ISMG and me personally for nearly 2 decades now, which is utilizing webinars as content marketing assets, which are ultimately used as demand generation drivers. Our parent company, ISMG, actually got off the ground in 2005 and 2006 by producing webinar sessions laser focused on mostly regulatory compliance topics within the banking and finance sector. In fact, we owe much of our early success to these webinars based on the fact our subscriber base grew by leaps and bounds as more and more information security professionals became aware of the sessions we were producing. So very effective drivers for us in growing our initial database. We still focus heavily on webinars, every day hosting scheduled sessions along with thousands and thousands of on-demand sessions available in our archive. ISMG also manages many webinar programs for the cybersecurity vendor community. I think webinars have become a standard tactic in the modern cybersecurity marketer's arsenal. Although not a new tactic, I think during the pandemic and work from home environment, they've seen a resurgence as digital channels were really the only way to consume educational content. That said, some cybersecurity vendors do it better than others. And as ISMG hosts so many webinars for so many cybersecurity vendors, they are able to identify which topics, which sessions, and ultimately which vendors excel at utilizing webinars effectively. And KnowBe4 is consistently at the top of that list. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest, Mary Owen, VP of Marketing and Demand Generation with KnowBe4. So Mary, please take a moment to further introduce yourself, provide a bit of a backgrounder on KnowBe4 and what it is the company does for anyone not aware, and how your particular role fits within the marketing and sales organization.
Okay. First, thank you for having me on. This, I think, will be a lot of fun. Webinars are near and dear to my heart. So KnowBe4, we are the world's largest security awareness training vendor. And so what that means is that we train end users at over 50,000 organizations worldwide on social engineering tactics, and that's meant to help those organizations better manage the ongoing problem of social engineering, which is not going away anytime soon. So here, I've been here at KnowBe4 for almost 5 years. I manage the demand gen team, so that is encompassed of the inbound marketing side, which is social media, paid search, websites, blogs, that sort of stuff. We also have an outbound team managing webinars, also content syndication, email, all outbound communications. And then we have a campaign function, which sits kind of right in the middle, and they coordinate with both sides, inbound and outbound, for campaigns.
So you're knee deep in it. You're living the dream every day, the demand generation dream. And again, you know, we've been tracking KnowBe4 from a vendor marketing perspective for a number of years because you guys have run programs with our parent company specifically focused around webinars and have seen your name come repeatedly at the top of that list I was talking to. And I think now is a good time to segue over into you know, why we're even here today. And the reason that it's happened is that I'm going to share my screen here and present a couple of slides. We are producing research reports under our CyberTheory division that is focused on bringing to light basically intent data, specifically for content marketers and demand generation marketers. And the way that it comes together is we have access to, because CyberTheory is derived from ISMG, or Information Security Media Group, we have access to all of their first-party intent data under CyberTheory. So we've taken that intent data and, again, attempted to make sense of the type of content that's creating engagement with various audiences. This is a massive, massive data set, and we're actually partnering with the Scientia Institute to crunch all of this data. Quick plug for Scientia, great group to work with. They're actually headed by Wade Baker. He's the original author of the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. They work with many vendors, almost exclusively within the cybersecurity space, to crunch mega data sets. Lots of it comes from machine data, and attempt to make sense of that data and find correlations and other highlights. So we were a bit of a unique use case for them because they're used to working with product vendors, but we've known Wade and the group for a number of years. So we asked them to crunch this data, and what we focused on a wide range of different data points, and one of the areas was focused on webinars. Now, this graph here that you're seeing is a quick snapshot of the past 15, 16 years or so. If you use the ISMG sort of network as a microcosm for the content that's available to cybersecurity professionals, you could see even just within the past 2-3 years, even just during the pandemic, that the amount of digital content that's available to cybersecurity professionals has skyrocketed. I mean, it's just grown exponentially. And like I mentioned before, we've seen a bit of a renaissance for webinar assets, given that there's been a lack of in-person events, throughout those couple of years. That was really the only way that you could consume content. So one of the data points that we look at in our research is getting a sense of which vendor brands are creating the most engagement with cybersecurity audiences. And this graph that you're seeing here, these two graphs, these come from one of our earlier reports that was produced last year. It was looking at engagement data over Q1 of 2022. And what you see here is a list of the top vendors. But just let it be known that there were hundreds of others that didn't make it to this list. So what you're seeing here is really the upper echelon of cybersecurity vendor brands that are creating the most engagement with the ISMG audience through various types of assets. It could be webinars, it could be white papers, it could be case studies, research, you name it. And no surprises. I mean, you see brands like Cisco and Splunk and Palo Alto Networks. They're at the top, right? I mean, these are massive organizations. They have seemingly unlimited resources, whether it be financial resources, staff resources, or otherwise. So you would expect them to be towards the top. But you see some interesting other players in there, KnowBe4 being one of them. But I would call out others like a Lookout or an Xtero or even a Radiant Logic. These are much smaller entities that do not have the resources that some of the bigger vendors do, but yet are still creating a high level of engagement. And so we took a bit of a deeper dive and looked at the specific assets from these vendors that were creating that engagement. And as you can see here, as I referenced earlier, KnowBe4 came up at the top of the list. Again, this was over Q1 of 2022. And we'll come back to it in a second, but very interesting title for this asset, which happened to be a webinar that ranked #1 out of literally thousands of assets that were available. And then what prompted it even more was this is the same snapshot, but this is covering Q2 and Q3 of last year. And again, you see some of the similar types of entities up there, the Ciscos and Palo Alto Networks, but lo and behold, KnowBe4 came up again, this time in the #1 slot. And again, we looked at the assets that were creating that engagement and right away saw that KnowBe4 came up with the top asset out of, again, thousands that were available. Again, a webinar. And again, a very, very crafty title, the ransomware hostage rescue list, your step-by-step guide, etc. So that is actually what prompted us to reach out, is because KnowBe4 and your group has done such a tremendous job marketing these webinar assets. We feel like you guys are experts, and thought you could have some things to share with our marketing friends on how to make best use of these assets. So quick shout out, congrats to your group for coming up number one.
Thank you. No, it's very flattering and surprising.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. And again, I know our parent company, they're hosting just, they're a webinar machine. So there's so many webinars out there, so many webinars available. To come up in that top spot is definitely something to be said. So back to the title of this episode, I don't know if people caught on to it, but the title is Webinars 3.0, the Cybersecurity Marketer's Checklist. And that was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek play on the two assets that came up as number one here. When we were looking at this and we saw the data, we saw the title for this first webinar, Ransomware 3.0. We thought it was bad, and then it got even worse. And many of us were running around sort of like, well, ransomware 3.0, what happened to ransomware 2.0? Did we miss something? It creates that sort of FOMO, like, wait a second, maybe I missed something here. So I'm eager to hear how you guys came up with these interesting titles.
Well, I have to give the credit to Roger Grimes. He was the presenter for both of those. But ransomware 3.0, it's really because, okay, the first generation of ransomware locked your machine. Everybody knows about that. And then shortly thereafter, it evolved really quickly. So 2.0 and 3.0 really kind of happened at the same time. So that's why we skipped over. So it's, ransomware attackers exfiltrating data, and then also the threat of them publishing that data or using that data for their own nefarious purposes. So all of that really just kind of ratcheted things up. So it's much more, it's a much bigger threat at that point.
Sure. And like I said, I think for us, I know our project management team, they toil over assets day in, day out. They A/B test, subject lines and titles and abstracts. And I know as soon as they saw this, they were excited that this was going to be a good asset. They can sense it right away. And just one other thing to note on this slide, and also this other one, that there are a lot of webinar sessions that are coming up as creating the most engagement with our audience. Some of them are on demand, which I think says something. I know that there's a big emphasis on scheduled sessions and live sessions, but we do see that on demand is very viable. Again, I think the pandemic probably trained a lot of people to consume content digitally, but perhaps even more so on their own time, right? When they want to view those sessions. But it's interesting that so many webinars come up as creating that top line level of engagement. So speaking of webinars, we briefly touched on it in our planning call, and you mentioned it up front that that's just one of a number of, obviously, tactics and assets that you have in your arsenal. Talk a little bit about what is the strategy behind, utilizing webinars within your overall demand generation program.
Sure. Well, I mentioned that our market is security awareness training. And so our company has been around for 12 years, and webinars have really been really important since the beginning. And if you think about like what the market was like 12 years ago and even 5 years ago, there really wasn't a security awareness training market. Like most IT admins were like, oh yeah, I do that with a PowerPoint once a year, or like it was, just kind of like a checkbox requirement. And it really kind of wasn't taken seriously. And so we used webinars as an education tool, really to reach as many people as possible with our message and evangelize for it. So that's kind of the history of webinars, and we continue to do that today.
Good. And where do they fit within the stack? Like when you think of the assets that you have available, white papers and webinars and case studies and videos and all the various different types of content assets, where do webinars fit sort of in that stack with regards to, do you look at people that view webinars any differently than if they consume other assets when it comes to demand generation?
Not particularly, not in terms of value, but it's all meant to educate, right? And so we do tons of webinars, tons of white papers and ebooks, blogs out the wazoo. That we really focus on content, like much more than any other company I've worked at, and I think that's part of the magic.
Yeah. Well, we know you had mentioned up front that your company really embraces marketing. A bit of a breath of fresh air, I'm sure, working for an organization that does take it as seriously. So give our listeners a little bit of insight. I don't want all of the trade secrets, but what's sort of like your secret sauce for putting together these effective webinars? I know during our planning call, you were mentioning, a decent process that you go through to actually vet out and understand which ones might be better performers than others.
Sure. Well, I think it does stem from what you were saying. Our CEO, he is a marketer. He's a writer. He's been doing this his whole life. So marketing was really like the core from the beginning. And he recognized the need to develop this market. And so early on, one of the smartest things he did, I think, was start to hire on a team of evangelists. So these were people who their sole job is speaking, writing, listening to customers and prospects on our behalf, and like really, taking in like what the market is saying. They all happen to be experts in their own rights. So we're just really lucky to have that kind of a staff. So they're generally coming up with the topics, and these topics are not security awareness training topics. They are security awareness training adjacent. So we're talking about really the strategies that cyber criminals are using in their attacks, and the things that our customers and our prospects are seeing in their own companies every day. And that's really what we try to focus on is that level. And then we tie it into our company at the end. So it's definitely not a sales pitch. It's all, really, we want this to be really great content for the people who are viewing, which gets them coming back and gets them to remember us. We also spend a lot of time crafting our abstracts and our titles, and we have certain tools that we use to like help us measure, and it's a bit of a scientific process, I would say. So and we test, which I'm sure we'll probably get into later. But we also have a really crack team here. We've got Mandy Nulf and Natalie Schultz, who are really just like managing the entire process to make sure it goes flawlessly, and we follow the process every time.
Well, it sounds like a very mature process. Definitely not just a, hey, let's throw a webinar together and see if it sticks. Which we do see. I mean, if you don't have the resources and the background and capabilities to do it, and you need to be producing webinars, I think it's better to have something than nothing. But if you have the wherewithal to be as structured and test, have that testing environment to know which ones might perform better than others, and have that process mapped out, that's the way to go. And again, staying focused on webinars, obviously, like not asking for any specific KPIs or percentages or anything, but like you mentioned that maybe you look at people that end up viewing a scheduled session all the way through the end, they might be more valuable than others, or like how do you measure like the effectiveness of these webinars?
Sure. Well, all of our webinars start with in-house production. So when you come up with a new topic, we produce it in-house, we present it to our audience, and that's part of the testing process. So we can tell immediately, like we have benchmarks for every promotion. I know immediately after the first promotion has gone out, is it going to be successful or not successful based on like the numbers that we're seeing. And at that point, we still have time where we can go back, take another look at the title or the abstract and kind of tweak things. And the whole goal is to get the registrations as high as possible so we can get the highest number of live attendees. And live attendees are really important. That's our primary metric, because if we can get somebody to sit down for the webinar, to actually like take the time and put it in their schedule, 90% of them will complete the webinar, whether that's through us or one of our third-party vendors like ISMG. We get a huge completion rate on those webinars. And the important thing about getting them to stick, and the reason why they stick, is because we want to deliver content with real value. So again, this is not a sales pitch. We are giving them actionable takeaways and explaining the why, so that they can apply these things within their organizations right away. And giving that kind of value is what gets them to remember us. And when they do need a security awareness training vendor, hopefully they're going to think of us.
Yeah, no doubt. And you bring up a really good point. We actually looked at the opposite when we were going through our research with Scientia, looking at some of the worst performing assets. And what we found was there was more of a propensity for those assets to include vendor brand names. And that's something that does hearken to a sales pitch, very product centric or very service centric. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, the name of the game is offering good education and good information. It's okay to subtly pitch at the very end. That's a given. But I think the more valuable the information that you're providing, the more positively it's going to be received, and the more positive association with your brand. And we never see that. I don't think we ever see that from your webinars. I don't think you mention, know before by name, or like you said, even allude to some of the main products and services that you offer.
If anything, we probably should do that more.
Hey, give it a shot. Yeah.
It's
hey,
very,
go through your
very
testing
subtle.
processes. Yeah, I'm sure you'd find some that work. Well, shifting gears just a tad, ABM, account-based marketing, all the rage these days. How do you incorporate ABM into your webinar programs? What's the strategy?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously we're using it. So we have target lists for various types of actions or things we're looking at. And we make sure that we are inviting individuals from organizations that are in those ABM target lists to all of our activities. But we also have specific presentations or events that we do just for them. And so that's probably the biggest area where we're using it within webinars or online presentations.
Yeah. And how do you, just out of curiosity, how do you define that ABM list?
Well, that's part of the secret sauce they can't really share.
No worries, no worries. Well, there's some intelligence gathering going on there. Well, obviously, a main goal for webinars is lead generation and demand generation, and ultimately contribution to pipeline revenue. But there's a lot that goes on after a webinar concludes, and you get the contacts and the leads from those webinars. Again, not looking for any trade secrets or anything, but in general, like what's your strategy that's led to success for handling those leads? I mean, do you send them straight over to the sales team to start dialing, or is there a nurturing program that you run through? Are they treated any differently than perhaps leads that you get from other content marketing assets?
They're actually treated the same way. They do go to the sales team. And we also have a very detailed nurture process that we put them through. So it's happening simultaneously.
Got it. Yeah, I think we've heard from our clients that I think the most mature and successful approach is, I mean, look, you have to consider these are single assets, right? And even though it's a webinar and you're seeing potentially high level of engagement, meaning they stick around for the entire webinar and they could match your ABM lists. In those cases, maybe it makes sense to pass them right over to your sales team if they are a high value prospect. But I do think you need that hybrid approach where I don't know what the rule is, 80-20 or 90-10, right? The majority of them go to your lead nurturing processes. You continue to feed them content. You do your own lead scoring, and when they bubble up and reach a certain threshold, then they make sense to go over to your sales team. Not everybody has the resources to put those processes in place. We understand if you don't have that sort of BDR or lead nurturing process, typically the only alternative is to send everything directly over to sales. But we have seen, and I think it's known at this point, again, driven largely by the pandemic, that more and more professionals, they want to conduct research on their own, right, before speaking with a sales rep. So the more information, the more valuable information and education you can provide to them until they're ready to have that sales conversation, the more successful those sales conversations will be. Well, talk about driving registrations, right? Everybody produces webinars, but not everybody can get an adequate number of people to attend those webinars. What's your strategy? How have you been so effective at creating that high level of engagement?
Well, mostly for our own webinars, we're relying on email marketing, and we have a very robust email marketing program, I would say. So we have a variety of tactics and tools that we use. One of them, which going back to Stu, who is our CEO and he was our CMO for the first 10 years of the company. He started a newsletter way back when called Cyber Heist News. And we have been collecting.
I'm a subscriber, by the way.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Again, it's really content focused. We try to deliver like breaking news and make it as useful to the subscribers as possible. But we have a huge subscriber base for that. And that's part of the secret sauce, is that we put webinar invitations into those newsletters, and that's where we get a lot also through our other email channels. So shout out to Stu. Great plan on Cyber Heist News.
That's great. It's almost like your own little media company within sort of like a product or a service vendor, and something that I think many organizations recognize, but you're not giving anybody any easy answers here, Mary, because that's not an easy thing to do, right? You need to have resources, you need to have time, you need to produce a lot of content in order for that engine to work.
True. Yeah, it does. It takes a lot of work. Like I said, the blogs we have, I think I said we have blogs out the wazoo, and that's part of the source is, seeing like what's really sticking with the blogs. And I am an instant subscriber to our blog. So every time new topics come out, I look at them, and that's lots of times where our webinar topics come from. I'm like, oh, well, that sounds really cool. And I go to the evangelist and be like, do you think this could be a webinar? Is there enough content here? So that's, I think, using your own internal resources and like, paying attention to the conversations that are happening is something that anyone can do.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have a great testing ground for finding, what those successful topics might be. And that kind of leads me to my next question. Is, you alluded to it before, but how do you know when you have a great webinar asset on your hands? Not everyone is going to be a top performer, but how do you identify those top performers?
True. So again, we have the evangelists who are talking to, just so many people on a day-to-day basis. So they're gathering information firsthand. And we've been doing this for a while, so we can kind of like pinpoint a topic that we think is going to be good. Like I said, we spend a lot of time developing the title and abstract. And then when we put it out, it's really that promotion engine that, like I said, we have benchmarks. We know immediately if something is on pace, if it's overperforming, underperforming, and when we can adjust our promotional strategy to enhance whatever is happening. So everything gets tested in-house, like I said, and we can tell, obviously, the top performers, they immediately go out into content syndication. We're doing those with our third-party vendors, and those are the ones that we're really putting the promotional support behind, because we know we've already tested it out. We know that they're going to work.
So test. That is the marketer's playbook. And before you go out spending money syndicating through third parties, make sure you have, those top performing assets identified. Yeah, that's a very mature process and not something that we see from everybody. Well, good. We briefly touched on scheduled webinars versus on-demand webinars. And again, I'll make the plug. I know that you're very focused on the scheduled webinars and making sure that people are there and that they're attending those scheduled sessions. There's definitely something to be said, though, for especially as you get higher in the stack and you're speaking with executives who have busy schedules, right? Sometimes it's more conducive for them, if they're interested, to view content when they want to, right, on their own schedules. But there's definitely something to be said about that extremely high level of engagement if you are kind of sort of mandating to someone that if they want your content, they have to be there at a specific day and time, right? So talk more about that. How does that factor into how you view the success of these webinars and possibly even the I don't know, the higher level of engagement around individual leads?
Well, I mean, on demand is certainly super important. We want to get them live. I mean, that's the number one goal. But you can reach so many more people on demand. Yeah, so whether that's content syndication, we're pushing things out through email, we're using social media, a variety of different tactics to get these webinars out in front of as many people as we can. And that's really part of the magic too, is when you get a topic that's a really top performer, it can live on for quite a while, especially when you're doing the type of content that we're doing. A lot of the topics are somewhat evergreen and you can get a lot of mileage out of them. So it really does benefit you to take the time up front and make those as good as possible so that, you can get months or maybe even a year out of a particular topic.
Sure. And do you treat those any different, contacts that view a live webinar and sit through the duration of it versus somebody that views an on-demand version?
Yes, we do. And that's primarily because people who view on demand are generally not viewing for as long. If they haven't, like with a live webinar, if you've taken the time to put it on your schedule, show up, be there, like it's a priority more than an on-demand view. And we generally see that on-demand viewers don't stay on as long.
Yeah. Agreed. Good. Well, speaking of webinars, are there any other assets that you found, whether it be white papers, case studies, survey reports, that you think produce as good results as webinars? Any other sort of content marketing assets in your arsenal that you focus on?
All of them. I mean,
All of them?
everything is important to us. Like I said, I mean, we're publishing blogs every day. We're doing a number of webinars every month. And lots of times what will happen, the webinar usually comes first, or maybe the blog comes first. But when we get a winning topic, many times we will spin that into additional assets. And that's really where, like, if something is a really super hot topic and we got a great response, we'll turn it into an ebook or a white paper or an infographic or, all. And then you just another way to get extra mileage out of those curated topics.
Yeah, great ideas. And I think, as we alluded to, with more and more people doing their own research as opposed to engaging with sales reps, that concept of moving people through the buyer's journey using content assets is even more critical. So the more you can stretch, a particular asset, the better position you're going to be in to gauge, the engagement with those various assets through the buyer's journey.
Well, plus people like to consume content in different ways. It's not everyone is a webinar person. Some people prefer a written asset. Some people prefer an infographic. Probably a lot of people prefer an infographic. It just isn't going to give you the same depth of content. So we try to present content in a lot of different ways so that the user can choose how they want to consume it.
Sure. And I know CISOs are usually the the sort of unicorn that most cybersecurity vendors, and I'm using cybersecurity in a loose sense. I'm talking about information security, information risk management, compliance, regulatory. I sort of put all of those under the cybersecurity bucket these days. But most vendors, they think of the CISO as the ultimate decision maker and driver for many products and services. do you see, a high level of engagement? Are there differences when it comes to like title levels or job functions within an organization that engage with your webinars?
The topics that we're putting out are mostly security related topics. So they're much more aimed at the IT admin and the problems that they're seeing every day and giving them tools that they can use to mitigate those issues. So most of our content is not targeted to the CISO, although we do have some. It really depends on what the purpose of it is.
Well, that is, I think that's the main takeaway, is that irregardless of who your target audience is, make sure the content is applicable to them. And we see that very often. In fact, that was one of the takeaways from the first version of our research report, was that we see so many cybersecurity marketers using the same assets, but from quarter to quarter, trying to target different audiences with those same assets. And we see it all the time. The most effective content marketing assets are ones that are produced laser focused on a specific audience, as opposed to using a more general asset.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, quickly, last item here on the agenda, a fun one coming up recently, is the whole concept of AI, and Chat GPT is on everybody's radar. And so we had a little bit of a fun spin on it and decided to take a stab at having Chat GPT write an abstract for us, right? So we went in and added in very generic, write an abstract for a webinar and security awareness training. Thought it did a decent job, very generic, very high level, but definitely a good starting point. And then even drilled down a bit more and asked it to focus more on phishing training, right? And include those coveted 3 bullet points that described, what are the exact takeaways. And without even speaking with us beforehand, they came up with some good takeaways here. So where do you see this? Where do you see AI and Chat GPT like services? How are they going to fit in with your webinar strategy moving forward?
I think it's really interesting technology. Maybe not all the way there. Our CEO actually, he plays around this quite a bit because he writes a lot of our blogs. And so lots of times in our blogs recently, he will have ChatGPT also write a blog on whatever his topic was. So that's kind of fun. We recently did a webinar on AI, and ChatGPT was a part of that. And so we thought about doing the same thing, having ChatGPT actually write the abstract for the webinar, but we couldn't get in, and we were on a tight deadline. So we ended up doing it the old-fashioned way and handwriting our abstract. But it was a very popular webinar, and I'm really glad that we did that topic. Our speaker, like I mentioned before, our evangelists, they're all kind of like, have their own like little things that they do. And the particular speaker for this webinar is known for presenting dad jokes during his presentations. And so he actually had ChatGPT write some dad jokes for for the webinar, and they were really bad.
Well, isn't that good for a dad joke though?
As bad as a dad joke is, these were really bad. So it was like, it didn't quite get the context of humor. So I think it definitely has its limitations, but I mean, it's just going to grow exponentially over the next few years. And we're not necessarily using it in marketing other than for fun stuff. But I'm sure in the future, it's going to become more and more popular.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think what we've seen experimenting is the more you train it, the more you kind of follow up with the initial instructions, right? That's why we started out with a very generic, and then asked it to drill down a little bit more. You can get, very detailed with your ask. No replacement for humans, not at this point anyway.
Not yet.
But definitely a great starting point. So good. Well, good luck with using AI in the future with your webinars. Mary, it's been very great having you on the episode. Really appreciate you joining us. Congrats again for just the high level of engagement that you and your team are creating with webinars. That is no small feat, especially against thousands and thousands of assets. We have not yet finished crunching Q4 data from last year, but if things follow suit, I'm quite sure we're going to see the know before name up at the top of the list again. And good luck with your webinar programs moving forward. Any last comments or input from you before we go?
Well, one, this has been really fun. So thank you for inviting me. I hope that we're on the top. We're always, constantly trying to beat ourselves, trying to do better than we've ever done before. So we're always trying to innovate and be creative. And speaking of that, we happen to be hiring right now. So we're hiring a director of outbound marketing. So if you like what you've heard today and you think you'd like to be on a team like this, I would love, for you to go out and apply on knowbefore.com. The director of outbound marketing is going to manage the webinar program. So, this should be near and dear to their hearts.
Nice. Well, any marketer that covets, having an organization that really embraces marketing and content and everything, that would be a very attractive position. You guys have things set up in a finely tuned way. So.
Thank you.
Good. Well, Mary, this has been great. Great discussion with you. Hopefully our listeners got something out of it. One of my main takeaways is it's not easy. There's no simple answer to creating effective webinars. You have to be vested. It has to be a little bit of a long-term play. You have to embrace content marketing. You have to have other things set up around your webinar content marketing practices to make them effective. And test. That's ultimately going to produce the best results for you. So
Couldn't agree more.
Great, Mary. Have a good rest of the day. We'll talk soon.
You too.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.